You ready? Hi, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters January program on the health of our elections. I'm Robin Schmidt, President of the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area. I want to thank you for joining us today to hear from state and local experts on this critical issue for our democracy. Our programs help you stay engaged with League and our community. We encourage you to check out our website for other opportunities to stay connected and be informed. Our website calendar includes both League and community events that you might be interested in, and our Ways to Engage page offers even more opportunities for you to stay connected. We welcome you to join us in learning and volunteering. Without volunteers, we would not be able to bring you programs like this. And consistent with today's topic, I want to really highlight the outstanding work of our volunteers and our Voter Services Committee as they gear up for the 2022 elections. From educating the public on voter registration, to entering candidate information into the Vote 411 system, to getting out the vote, they make a huge difference in our community and our democracy. I appreciate the talents and all of the volunteers and innovative work of the committee under the leadership of Chris Haskell. They asked me to remind you that this year there are 4 elections. For those who have a primary election, the election date will be February 15th for the spring election. The spring municipal elections are on April 5th. The fall primary is August 9th, and the fall general election is November 5th. Today's discussion of lessons learned from the past election reflects the League's focus on educating voters and supporting free and fair elections. Our panelists, La Crosse County Clerk Ginny Dankmeyer and Wisconsin Election Commission Administrator Meagan Wolfe will reflect on the 2020 election, assessments of its accuracy and security, and how those assessments will influence elections now and in the future. I remind you that this program is being recorded and a link to it will be on our website in a few days. If you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the question box located at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor the questions, and at the end of the presentations, we'll allow time for questions and for the panelists to answer. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We are political, but we do not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. I'll now turn it over to our League board member, Ellen France, to introduce our speakers, and thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Meagan Wolfe and Ginny Dankmeyer. Ginny has participated in our programs in the past, and so some of you know her well. She started in the county clerk's office in 2007 and was appointed county clerk in February of 2011. She's seen a lot in her years here. Recounts, recalls, redistricting, and even administering elections during a pandemic. Meagan Wolfe is the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. The WEC is an agency tasked with administering and enforcing Wisconsin election laws. She became an interim administrator in March of 2018 and was unanimously confirmed to a 4-year term by the state Senate in May of 2019. Her position is a nonpartisan position. The commission is also, well, it's bipartisan, with members appointed by legislative leaders and the governor. And right now, I believe it sits at half of one and half of the other persuasion. Again, welcome to both of you. We're going to start with Ginny this morning. And I've asked both speakers to do roughly 25 minutes or so. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions from our audience. So Ginny, you're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having us and giving us this opportunity to speak. Hopefully we can give some insight on the elections, past, present, future. You know, as Ellen said, elections, recall, recounts, redistricting, you know, these are some of my favorite things. I actually love working with the elections. I love working with the poll workers, the municipal clerks, doing training with them. So, you know, I'm excited that we have elections coming up. I'm excited that we have 19 contested county board races. that election night will actually be exciting to find out who the winners are versus knowing who the winners are before it even happens. So thank you for having us here today. I have to start with saying the biggest takeaway we had from the 2020 election was that La Crosse County has some of the most amazing municipal clerks and poll workers. When we were faced with administering an elections during a worldwide pandemic, something we knew nothing about at the time. At one point, we weren't even sure if we were going to have that April election. It was set your alarm clock, wake up that morning, and we'll see if we're having an election or not. Not once did I have a municipal clerk say, that's not my job. This isn't what I signed up to do. I'm walking away. They all stood up. They took everything in stride that was thrown at them. They worked together. They shared ideas on how to get PPE. They shared designs that their highway guys created for the plexiglass barriers. If one clerk got sent to quarantine with absentee voting hours, other clerks stepped in to help out with those hours to make sure voters could still cast their ballots. So it was something that was absolutely amazing to watch and be a part of. And I'm excited that I have those amazing clerks here in my county. My role is the chief election official of La Crosse County. I oversee the elections at the county level. The municipal clerks oversee the elections at the polling locations. They oversee the absentee voting. They oversee a lot of the election day duties. I'm here for support for them on those days. I provide training to all my poll workers and municipal clerks. Not all county clerks do that. I have reasons why I do that. And because of the number of recounts we've had here in La Crosse County, that's the main reason I do it. If we're going into a recount, I want to know that all of my municipal clerks and poll workers are filling that paperwork out the same way. I don't want to be sitting in a recount looking at this paperwork and trying to figure out what's going on here, what's missing, why this is filled out differently. We go into a recount, we know everything is filled out the same way, so we can process the recount. It goes quicker that way. I also provide training because when a voter goes into a polling place, it shouldn't matter what polling place in La Crosse County they go into, they should have that same experience. It shouldn't matter what poll they go into, they should get the same, here's the voter poll books, here's where you get your ballots. It all should be set up the same, and that's why I do that training, so we are all working on the same page here in La Crosse County. One of the unique things I do as the chief election official here in La Crosse is I code elections in-house. There's not many counties that do that. A lot of counties contract out with their election vendors to code their elections. We're unique that I do that here. It's cost saving, saves us money. It's efficient. I believe it's more secure. And it's more timely that because I code in-house, I'm not waiting on my vendor to code my ballots. I can get this done ahead of time. So as soon as we have the certified candidates, I'm going to get my ballots over to the printers so we can get them back on time to meet the deadlines that we need for absentee voting. With coding in-house, we have extra security. The media sticks we use with these machines are kept stored in my vault. My vault only has access to me and my staff. So that's just an added security where these sticks aren't being sent back and forth when we have to keep them for the 22 months. I know they're in my vault, they're secured. I can get a list of who had access to that vault and to know that they're safe. One of the things that we dealt with a lot was saying that our machines got hacked. They're connected to the internet and that's how they got hacked. That's how votes got changed. When I code elections, the computer I use is a standalone computer. The only thing it's connected to is the electricity plug-in in the wall. So there's no way for someone to be able to hack in to change anything on my coding. There's no way for someone to get into the media sticks to say I changed what that is. So a lot of the stories where we say, well, we can show that this was hacked or that was hacked, that's just not true because these machines are standalone and they're not connected to anything that could show that you could get into them. The DS200s, that's another thing we have. I spent a lot of time on the phone talking to people after the November 2020 election. Anybody that had stories of something they thought happened, I was always willing to listen to them or email them back. One of the stories we got a lot was one person called me and said they could show that our DS200s were hacked and they could show the exact day that our IP addresses got hacked. And I asked her if she could tell me what day that was, and she said it was November 6th. I said, well, at that point, our machines were shut down in storage and all the media sticks were in my vault locked up. So I know that didn't happen. If they did happen, there's nothing that they took or changed. But furthermore, our machines are not connected to the internet. In the 2020 election, up until recently, Our machines did not have modems, so there was no way for them to be connected to the internet. So a lot of the theorists that calls and say, hey, I know your machine was connected to the internet, I can show proof, I have a report that shows it was hacked. That's just not the case, because at that point we didn't even have modems. There was no way you could even attack to those machines via the internet or anything else. With our machines now, and we did have an update to our machines, we do have modems installed on our machines now, but even with the modems now, when they send those results, they're sent on a secured and private network through a cell service. It's not connected to the internet. They're not connected to the internet throughout the day. I know we get a lot of people say, I can show you when you look at the screen that little icon right there shows that your machine is connected to the internet, and that's not the case. It's not till the very end of the day when they're ready to transmit results does the machine at that point connect to the secure network we have. It transmits the results, which takes a matter of seconds, and then it disconnects. So them are some of the factual things out there that are being taken and misinterpreted, and then we're saying like, oh, we can prove that all these machines got hacked. That's how our security system works with the DS200. They're never connected to the internet. Like I said, they use a private secure network that we create and we use. We are provided through us through a cell phone self-service. Another of the concerns we had was the need for forensic imaging or forensic audit done of the machine. To this day, I've yet to have anybody be able to describe to me what a forensic image would be of that machine, what a forensic audit would mean of these machines. All the data stored on these machines comes through the media sticks. These are the media sticks that are secured in my vault. Once they go out to municipal clerks, they're secured under seals until they use them on election day. These machines have a static firmware. That firmware doesn't change, it doesn't record anything. That's simply what is on the machines. All the brains that machine uses on election day comes from that media stick. Even if these machines did have something that it would record, we have to keep in mind that these machines have been used multiple times. So if anything was on it, which there's not, it would have been overridden by several elections we've had since the November 2020 election. One example I like to give that I think really portrays how these machines work is they're really like a Nintendo. Back in the day when you had Nintendos, if you turn that Nintendo on, most instances, all you got was a blue screen. You couldn't do anything with it until you put that gaming cartridge in that machine. Once you put that gaming cartridge in, then you could play your games, you could see your high score, your low score, everything like that. These machines are exact same way. You can turn them on, power them up, and you're going to get that main screen that says election definition not found, and that's all you can do. There's nothing more you can do until you put that media stick in that machine, just like the gaming cartridge into a Nintendo. That has the brains of everything. It tells you what your election is. It's going to tell you what ballot styles it can accept. It's going to tell you if we're going to reject overvoted ballots or undervoted ballots. It's going to record all the results on election night. That's the brains of the machine. At the end of the night, when we close the polls, we pull that stick out. That machine is now done. There's nothing left on it for to do or to record. So, that hopefully is a little summary of how these machines work to help people kind of understand that, the machines are just a standalone plug and play for the most part. The brains come from that media stick that we keep secure as we go. Now, as I mentioned, we do have modems on our machines now. As with technology advances, we needed to upgrade our coding software. We also needed to replace our ADA compliant machines. They were at the end of their life cycle. They were no longer able to get parts replaced. They were no longer able to be serviced. And with that came a large amount of money. So we were still operating on Windows 7. We needed to get a more secure Windows, which was Windows 11. So with the help of the state, they were able to secure the Wisconsin Elections Commission, secure grant money that they put down into the counties. I was able to secure enough grant money to help pay for the new software. With that new software came the modems. At that time, the clerks from Crosse County, we hadn't decided if we were going to use the modems or not, but they came with the software, so we went ahead, we got them, we had them installed, so they were there for us to use. Now, modems on election night make it very efficient. As soon as the polls close, the clerks can modem in the results. I have them here at the county clerk's office. I can get those results onto the website. Everyone has the election results. On election night, everybody wants everything right away. Prior to that, how we used to do that is the clerks would close out the polls. They had to finish all their polling place duties, and then they would drive those media sticks into me. I would read them on machine. They would then post them on the website. Sometimes it was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning before we had our final results, but that was the way we did it. That was the most secure way to do it. With these modems now, if we use them in February and April, we'll get these results quick. We hope to have all results up by 10 o'clock. Now that's not going to change. The clerks are still going to bring in those media sticks to us. We're still going to read those media sticks. On election night, the clerks are going to call in after they modem the results. So they're going to tell us, this is how many ballots I have cast according to the report that printed off from that voting machine. Here's the votes cast from the top contests. We're going to be comparing that to what the modem results sent in to make sure what's being sent in is accurate. That's the process we're going to continue to follow. And that's one of the reasons we can't stress enough that election night results are unofficial. There's so many checks and balances that take place after the polls close to make sure what's got sent in, what's being reported, what we're going to send to WIC and the canvas system, what we're going to canvas at the county level are all accurate. The election night results, this is what we have for you right now. It's unofficial. We still have to follow through all our checks and balances to make sure what we're going to official certify and send to the state is right and has done everything we needed to do. And again, those checks and balances are to make sure that everything was done accurate, that everything was done securely, and that the results are certified, and we can say that for sure this election was held with the utmost integrity and we're being transparent, and you're going to see everything that we see, which is why we have our canvas board. We open it to the public so everybody can come in and see everything that we're comparing. Whether we have modems or not, that doesn't change what the Crosse County Canvas Board does. When we canvas our results, we are only going to be canvassing off of the printed results tapes that come from that machine. We're not going to be looking at the results that came in from the modem. We're going to be looking at that results tape. We're going to look at how many ballots were cast. How does that compare to how many ballots or voters we had on the poll book? Are those numbers the same? If they're not, we want to know why. We're going to look at the high contest on the ballot. Does that about match how many ballots I got cast? If it's too high, too low, again, we're going to look in to see why not. A lot of times when our numbers don't match up, it's because there was a voter number that got used twice. Sometimes the numbers stick together, so a number got skipped. During our canvas, if something doesn't match up, we want to have answers why. And in most cases, we do get those answers as to why they don't match up. And in the end, everything will balance out before we'll certify our results. We also, at the end of the elections, after elections, we do audits. In November of 2020, we audited 3 different reporting units. These reporting units are randomly selected by the Elections Commission. I believe they're randomly selected based on what machines are used, based on reporting units. So our city of Onalaska had over 4,000 ballots that we audited. The city of La Crosse had over 2,000 ballots audited, and another reporting unit within the city of La Crosse was almost 800 ballots. When we count these in an audit, every ballot is counted by hand, and it's counted twice by 2 different people. When we count these ballots, we're looking at them, how the machine would count this, not how I am seeing this for voter intent. And all of those instances, we found no irregularities, no discrepancies, all the numbers matched up perfectly. So even if they said someone did hack into the machine, they changed votes, you just don't know it because the numbers matched up. Well, we just hand counted almost 8,000 ballots to show that these numbers are exactly the same as what the actual ballots are that were put in the machines by the voters. And so that's one of the checks and balances we do to make sure these machines are counting accurately. If there were discrepancies or irregularities, we would go back to find out why, what's wrong with this machine, what's wrong with something else, and we would solve that problem before we'd use that machine again for the next election. Checks and balances are put in place throughout the entire election. I could not sit here and tell you, I don't have enough time to tell you all the checks and balances are there in place that we are constantly doing on election day. I don't know if some people remember, there was the city of Onalaska. We know how many absentee ballots go to the polls on election day. They have an absentee log. They check that absentee log with the certificate envelopes. They check that with the number of absentee voters on the poll book. They knew they were short on the number of absentee ballots that were processed on the election day. Something went wrong. We realized that because of those checks and balances in place. When we went back to review it, to research it, find out what happened, came up that we felt poll worker grabbed a stack of absentee ballots that had not been processed yet. We were very transparent in this. The municipality did a press release to say what was going on. We went back and we recounted all the absentee ballots. They certified what should have been on the absentee list. They counted the absentee certificate envelopes. They matched it up with the absentee log. Once we recounted those absentee ballots, the numbers then matched. This is the checks and balances that are in place. These are the transparencies. This is how at the end of the election, when we finish our canvas board, we can say, this has been done with the utmost integrity, security, and transparency, because we're going to explain everything that's going on, what may have happened, what may have went wrong. As far as the November election, there was no significant problems found with our coding system, with the voting machines, or at any of the polling locations, at least nothing that wouldn't typically come up in a regular election. Excuse me. Absentee ballots. There's a lot of controversy around absentee ballots. There's concerns that absentee ballots, should they be continued, should they not be continued, where people vote in absentee when they shouldn't be. There's a lot of stories and theories out there on it. The one thing I want to remind people is, absentee voting is a privilege. It's not a right. And with that privilege comes added responsibilities that voters are required to comply with, so their absentee ballot is counted. One of that is filling out the proper request, providing the necessary information, whether you have to make sure you're registered first, whether you have to show proof of residency, a proper photo ID. You need to make sure that this ballot is returned on time. There's deadlines for getting your absentee ballot to make sure it's counted at the polls. The biggest problem we have is filling out the certification. That certification that you sent back with your ballot in that envelope needs to have a voter signature. It needs to have a witness signature and your witness address. That's one of the major things we see wrong with these absentee ballots. We even print off our certificate envelopes where the voter signature is highlighted in yellow, the witness signature is highlighted in yellow, and the address, to make this as obvious as we can when someone votes absentee, that this is what's necessary to make sure when you send your ballot back that we're going to get it counted. The other thing you have to remember when you vote absentee is that on election day when we're processing that ballot, you're not there to correct it. If you overvote a contest, if you cross-vote a ballot in the August election, you're not there to fix it. It's going to be counted the way it can be counted based on how you voted that ballot. So that's something else you have to take into consideration when you choose to vote absentee. I believe absentee voting is here to stay. I don't think the numbers will ever go back down to where we saw absentee voting before. I think they're going to stay high. And I really think that's because during the pandemic, when we were imploring people to please vote absentee, keep yourself safe, in April, everyone's at a stay-at-home order, keep yourself safe, keep the poll worker safe, keep the municipal clerk safe, request an absentee ballot by mail. I think people realized how convenient absentee voting was. Like, wait, I can sit at home on my couch, request this absentee ballot. They're going to send it right to my doorstep. I'm going to vote it. And then they're going to give me a self-addressed envelope and I can mail it right back to you. And I never even have to leave my house. I think people knew absentee voting was out there. I don't think they ever realized how convenient it really was. So I think the numbers of absentee voting will stay higher than normal. I don't know that they'll ever go back down to the way they were, obviously pending if any legislation affects absentee voting. And to kind of show the example of these absentee numbers, in April of 2019, so this is pre-COVID terms, we had 2,958 absentee ballots for that election. That was 13% of the ballots cast in April of 2019 was absentee. We jump forward to November of 2020. Granted, this was a height of COVID. We still had a lot of COVID. People were still voting absentee. 43,668 absentee ballots were cast in Crosse County. That's 65% of the ballots were cast absentee at that election. We move forward here to April of 2021, 7,585 absentee ballots were cast. That's 40%. So if you want to look at the April of 2019, April of 2021, those are two very comparable elections to what was on the ballot. We're looking at 13% of the ballots cast and we're looking at 40%. Granted, we still were in COVID at that time, but again, like I see, as we move forward, I think we're going to continue to see the higher number of absentee. Granted, in April of 20, when COVID hit, we were at the stay-at-home orders. We weren't necessarily prepared for all the high number of absentee voting that was going on. We also weren't prepared to be administering elections in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, but we did it, we handled it, we succeeded. The clerks did everything they could. It was extremely time tight timeline from the minute that COVID kind of became a big deal, the stay-at-home order, and when ballots had to get out and the election coming up. So they did everything we could to get voters the absentee ballots, and we did the best we could to make sure those certificates were filled out and that they were sent back to the clerk, to the municipal clerks to be processed. You know, we figured out, like, how are we going to get all these absentee ballots processed? We can't wait till the polls close, because then we're going to be sitting here till 2 and 3 in the morning processing these absentees. So we brought in extra voting machines so the clerks could process these absentees throughout the day. Because we know these numbers are going to stay high, a lot of the municipal clerks went out and bought extra machines, the DS200s. So they have machines that are dedicated to processing absentee during the polls on election day now. It takes time to process these, and this is the method we have, that we're not sitting here till 2, 3 in the morning trying to process all these absentees. You know, for first-time absentee voters in that April 20 election, we've seen a high number of ballots get rejected for having improper certifications. Granted, we did everything we could, but there just wasn't a lot of time to educate the public on what is needed to make sure your ballot is properly cast. November was a completely different story. Again, we still had 65% of our ballots cast. When I checked with the municipal clerks, and I don't remember if this was for a report for WIC or for something else, you know, we said, how many absentee certificate envelopes do you think you needed to either send back to the voter or to fix something on there that was missing to make sure that ballots count? We were looking at between 100 and 125. That's how many certificate envelopes had to be fixed that were sent back to the municipal clerks out of 43,600 absentee ballots. You know, we used the media. We used radio, we did TV interviews, we did press releases, everything we could possibly think of to get the word out that, hey, this is what you need to do if you're going to vote absentee to make sure that ballot gets counted. And obviously it worked, because we had such a low number of certificates that needed to be fixed in order for them to be counted. You know, clerks do everything they can to make sure your ballot gets counted. Our ultimate goal is to make sure all these ballots get counted. My ultimate goal in life is to have 100% turnout for every election. I'm realistic. I know that's never going to happen, but I can try, and I can still wish for that. But you know, our goal is to make sure ballots get counted. Whoever casts a ballot, we want to make sure your ballot is counted. As far as voter fraud, I think voter fraud was very minimal. I only know of a handful of cases. One case was a individual who got charged with a felony, convicted of a felony, had lost his voter rights, tried to falsify paperwork to see that he voted prior to him being convicted of a felony. Obviously, we didn't even have our ballots in hand at the time. I know the DA proceeded with fraud charges on that case. I know there was a couple other cases turned over to the DA. I don't always get reports back on what he proceeded with charging for voter fraud or not, but it was minimal. There was no more instances of voter fraud at the November 2020 election than what we would see at any other election we have. You know, there's always those cases of someone tried to vote absentee from their vacation home up north, and then they voted at the polls here. You know, that always gets caught, that always gets turned over to the DA. The college kids, you know, we see that where they'll vote absentee from back home. Again, on election day, they want to go to the polls and vote with their friends, not realizing that they already voted absentee and that they can't do that. So, you know, and those get caught with the statewide voter registration system, and they get turned over to the EDA to investigate, you know, and then it's his call if he proceeds with charging anybody with fraud. You know, and I'll wrap up here so I can make sure Megan has enough time to present, but our job is to always be looking for something to be wrong and always questioning everything that is going on. And once we stop looking for something to be wrong or stop questioning what's going on, I believe that's when our elections and our security are going to be put at risk. And that's when we're going to make ourselves vulnerable to the outside attacks, to fraud, and to everything else that we see going on. So as clerks, that's our job. We're always looking, we're always going to be questioning. And as long as we do that, I think we're going to make sure we have the safest elections we can have, at least here in La Crosse County.
Thank you, Jenny. Meagan, it's your turn. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, I'm just so pleased to be here and to have the opportunity to present with Clerk Dankmeyer. I think that was just a phenomenal overview of all the things that our local election officials are charged with doing. And, you know, as I'll talk about here in Wisconsin, we have a really unique structure in terms of how we administer elections. And they have an incredible amount of responsibility in each one of our communities around the state of Wisconsin. I was going to focus, so to start with, I'm Meagan Wolfe. I'm the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. I also serve as the state of Wisconsin's chief election official. Wisconsin is unique in how we run elections in a lot of ways. In about 40 other states, they have a Secretary of State who is elected and charged with elections. Here in Wisconsin, we have an administrator, and I'm required by law to be nonpartisan. So that's just where sort of some of the unique elements of how we run elections come into play. I did want to focus my remarks today on when I think back to 2020 and to 2021, I really think that there is a need for us to sort of get back to some of the basics in terms of how elections are administered. I mean, just think about all that information that Clerk Dankmeyer just presented in that 20 minutes about all the things we do to make sure elections are secure here. None of that's accidental. It's all intentional and carefully done by the clerks in your communities. And so I think really understanding how our elections run in the state of Wisconsin, where can somebody get involved in the election process if they have questions or concerns, it is really one of the biggest takeaways that I have, is that I think there's sort of a deep misunderstanding of how elections are administered here in the state of Wisconsin and how someone can get involved especially if they have questions about the election process. And so I did want to return to some of those basics and first kick it off with a discussion about how are we structured at the state level? How are decisions made in terms of how elections are run here in our great state? So to start with, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, this is a unique model. It is a bipartisan model. So the commission is made up, and this is our oversight body, of 6 commissioners. And 3 are appointed by Democratic leadership in the legislature, and 3 are appointed by the Republican leadership in the legislature. And so that means that we're always going to have an even 3-3 split on the commission. The law also says that any decision that's made by the commission, it requires a 2/3 vote. So what that means, and again, why it's so unique, is that any decision made by the commission has to be bipartisan, right? It has to have buy-in from at least one person from the opposite party of the majority of folks that voted. So 2/3 is 4 votes out of 6. And so those decisions are always going to be bipartisan. Another way that it's unique is that all of those decisions that are made by our commission are made in the public eye. As I often say, as it relates to election administration or election day, there are no dark corners in elections. There are no locked doors in elections. And in Wisconsin, that's more true than probably anywhere else because you also get to watch those decisions as they're made at the state level. So again, unlike most other states where they may have one appointed or elected official making those decisions, here in Wisconsin, every single decision has to be debated and made during a public meeting. And so you can actually watch those public meetings. After those public meetings, we're required to post the recording. We're required to post the minutes of that meeting. And so it's a really transparent process. The commission is required to meet quarterly, but they often meet much more frequently. In 2020, they met almost 40 times. In 2021, they had a number of special meetings. Tomorrow, we're actually having a meeting of the commission, and this is a meeting that's usually reserved for ballot access and challenge decisions for the spring election. But the commission has so much business that they need to cover that it'll be a full day tomorrow to discuss all of the many topics before them. These are also citizen commissioners, so they have other full-time jobs, and they really do have a big, important job in terms of all the information they need to understand and cover as part of these meetings. Just to give you a sense of what they're going to be talking about tomorrow, they'll be approving candidates to be on the ballot for the spring elections. So these are offices where the state is the filing officer, so they're mostly judicial races. If there were any challenges, which there are not to any of those candidates, then they would also consider those challenges and adjudicate those as part of their meeting. Another thing they're going to be discussing is our accessibility program for the 2022 elections. What's the accessibility audit program going to look like in terms of going and making sure that polling places are accessible to all voters of all abilities around the state? We'll also be talking about things like a local grant program for our local election officials if they choose to migrate to a .gov email account. We'll be talking about things like our public records policy, and we're also going to be considering next steps on things like promulgation of administrative rules. So a lot of ground to cover, but again, unlike other places, no matter how nuanced or small those discussions are, they have to happen during a public meeting. So the public gets to be involved and watch those decisions as they're made, object to them during public comment. So again, that's, I think, a really unique thing that really can't be overemphasized, is that every single decision is made in the open, and you can actually watch and participate in those decisions at the state level. We have staff, of course, at the Wisconsin Elections Commission, so staff like myself, and we're actually required by law to be nonpartisan. And this is something that the law requires in terms of us not being able to contribute to things like political campaigns, but it's also just something we take incredibly seriously. I think that it's really important for us to stay above the fray in terms of politically motivated conversations, and to make sure that we're focusing on implementing the law. We have the job of implementing Wisconsin State Statutes 5 through 10 and 12. And supporting our 1,922 local election officials in, implementing the directives of the commission, because again, it requires 4 of their votes to direct us to be able to do something to move ahead. We consider ourselves to be the little agency that could. We're a little agency with a big responsibility. We have about 40 employees at our office. And our job is, again, to support, 1,850 municipal clerks and 72 county clerks in making sure that we're helping in maintaining technology, providing training, and other responsibilities that we have as well. I've also been in elections at the state level for about 10 years, and I've had the really good fortune to serve in a number of different positions. So I started in elections as our voter outreach specialist, and my first task was to implement the photo ID law. And I did probably hundreds of presentations and conversations around the state with local election officials, with groups like this, implementing that law. I then moved into a project management role, implementing the myvote.wi.gov website. And then from there, I was appointed as the agency's deputy administrator, where I was our IT director and worked with overseeing the statewide voter registration database. And so I really value that experience in those opportunities to work with our local election officials as we've built our various technologies and trainings throughout the years. I think the next thing to kind of focus on and really pay attention to is, like Clerk Dankmeyer talked about, is how we administer elections at the local level. And, I'm not the expert in administering elections at the local level, but I can tell you how we work with the locals and support that model. So I would consider this to be one of the most major parts of our job, is to support our local election official partners. And I have just tremendous respect for our local election officials. I think their job is just incredibly difficult. They're often given little to no resources. A lot of times our county clerks, who, like Clerk Dankmeyer said, are the chief election official of their county, they may not be required to do things like training, but many of them do. And many of them help us to facilitate a lot of the things that we offer at the state level to the locals, because it's with 40 staff in 1,850 municipalities, we need their partnership and support. So most other states operate elections at the county level. So in most other states, you're going to see that there may be 50 to 100 county clerks who run elections. So by run elections, I mean registering voters, issuing absentee ballots, recording participation, some of those things, training poll workers, recruiting poll workers, some of those things in administering the elections. In most other states, you're going to see that the county level does that. So the county might have an elections department, an elections staff. Here in Wisconsin, we're one of a few states that run it at the municipal level in terms of those registration and absentee voting tasks. And we have 1,850 municipal clerks. So in every city, town, and village in Wisconsin, you have a local election official in addition to our 72 counties. So that brings us to a total of 1,922 local election officials. And as our municipal clerks go, what's been reported to us is about 2/3 of them are part-time. So about 2/3 of them might have another full-time job, and they may be a clerk for only 5 hours. They're only paid for about 5 hours of work in their township. And about 1/3 of those clerks turn over every single year. So every year you're going to see a new batch of clerks. I would expect that in a year like this, it's probably even larger because of more turnover that we may have seen in the last couple of years. And so our job is really to figure out how to provide technological support and training to those local election officials. And a lot of what we do is our statewide voter registration system and related technology. So the statewide voter registration system is really an end-to-end election administration system that we actually built here in the state of Wisconsin, along with our clerk partners, to ensure that it works for our more decentralized system and our really unique structure. And so that system supports everything from the nomination paper process, who's going to be on the ballot, to voter registration, maintaining both the currently registered voters and the history of voter registration in the state. It's also where the myvote.wi.gov website gets its information. So that information that's displaying on MyVote, that's coming from your local election official. And some of those municipal election officials, they actually contract with their county to help them with some of those data entry tasks. But all of that data that you see, your voter record, your local election official is the custodian of that information and is entering that information. And the MyVote system is really a portal into that information. We maintain other applications and build other applications ourselves, such as the Badger Voters site. That's where public or campaigns can go and purchase custom data reports that pulls data, again, from those local election offices. And we also have an electronic poll book, which we built ourselves here in the state of Wisconsin, that we maintain and that works with our statewide system as well. So technology and election security is a huge part of what we do. I always see election security as having sort of 3 legs to it. So the first is the statewide voter registration database. The second is the training of our local election officials. And the third is that voting equipment aspect of it. When it comes to the statewide system, and I think what we saw just paid huge dividends as we navigated through 2020, where there were all these unforeseen challenges. I was so grateful that our local election officials and us committed ourselves to making sure our systems were secure before 2020 happened. We were in an excellent place. We remain in an excellent place when it comes to the cybersecurity of our systems. Prior to the 2020 elections, we had implemented multi-factor authentication into our systems for every single user around the state. So just having a username and password, that's not enough. Every single user has a second factor that they also have to provide to get access. Before any of our clerks can get access to our system or those credentials, they have to complete cybersecurity training with our office before they get those credentials. We also have what we call endpoint detection that's part of the credentialing and on the devices of the local election officials. And this helps us to make sure that their technology is staying up to date and secure as well. And so again, all of those are things that we did prior to 2020, so that when 2020 came around and we had to shift our focus to all these pandemic related responses, we already had an incredibly secure system. And that was something that we were able to, again, I was just very grateful that we already had in place. When it comes to training, the state, we do not train the poll workers. That's a responsibility of the local election officials, but we do track and provide training to the municipal clerks and to those local election officials themselves. And so we have a lot of online trainings that we've provided even before the pandemic. We found that was a great way to reach our local election officials because, again, most of them have another full-time job and they're clerks part-time for their jurisdiction. And so being able to provide training on their time that they're able to access on their time is really important, and is really something that we put a lot of effort into, is making sure that we've got training on just about everything that's available to folks when and where they need it. Another thing we saw in 2020 is that, again, training poll workers is a local responsibility. That being said, sometimes, as I know the counties can attest to too, sometimes there's sort of, what's required and then what's the right thing to do. And we found that a lot of our clerks, with the volume of new poll workers, they needed some kind of remote way to be able to train those poll workers as well. So we did put together a online training that's available for poll workers as well, that our local election officials are able to use should they decide to use it, should they need it, should it be able to augment what they're already doing. And so, again, training and technology, that's a big part of what we do. When it comes to voting equipment, and I think this is another place where, again, thinking about where can we provide good information and make sure people understand how it works. This is a huge one, right? This is a huge one. I mean, as you saw, Ginny, she's the expert on voting equipment in her community. And there's an important reason for that, is that in each community, their voting equipment may be different. Because again, we are so decentralized here in the state of Wisconsin that each community gets to choose the type of voting equipment that they want to use. Now, it has to be voting equipment, of course, that's certified at the federal level, so by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and then at the state level. So one of those things that our commission has to decide on in a public meeting is certifying new election equipment. And so only once it's been certified at the federal level and at the state level to be available can a clerk choose from that. But there's no one centralized piece of equipment used by all of our jurisdictions. There's lots of different kinds that are in use in different communities for their community's needs. And so I think that in itself is a huge security effort as well, is that decentralization. If somebody were to, not that it would be easy to, but if somebody were to compromise some type of equipment, they would just be compromising that particular piece of equipment. They're not all networked together. They're not all the same. They're all unique individual pieces of equipment. We also do pre-election tests. Well, we don't, but the locals do pre-election tests of the voting equipment. And again, no dark corners, no locked doors. Those pre-election tests of the voting equipment, that's public as well. So that's something you can watch, is making sure that that voting equipment is operating how expected as we head into election day. And then after election day, as was mentioned, we do random selection of voting equipment around the state, and it is audited using a hand count to ensure that the hand count is the same as the voting equipment electronic tally of that ballot as well. Because every single ballot cast here in the state of Wisconsin is required to have a paper, auditable, voter verifiable paper trail. And so that's what's utilized when we do those audits. And if there were ever any kind of problem or there any kind of question or recount, that paper trail is always going to be the official artifact of the election. And so if there was ever a difference noticed in between the paper ballots and what the machine was saying, that of course would trigger additional discussions, deliberations to happen in terms of, how to address that problem. And that's why we do audits, right? That's why we do those audits, is to ensure that everything is adding up and is the same as well. So that's sort of some of the things that we do in terms of working with our local election officials. And again, in 2020, I think gave us all a great peace of mind, is knowing that we had those security measures in place when it came to the statewide system, when it came to training, when it came to our voting equipment as well. But I think what we're always looking to build upon is, how do we communicate those things, right? How do we make sure that people know about those security measures? How do we make sure that people know how to interact with those? how to get that information. So if they are seeing a fog of sort of misinformation around the election, where do they go to find out how things actually work? Which I'll talk a little bit more about as we close this out. I was also asked to talk a little bit about some of the reviews of the election, of the 2020 election. So the one that I'll talk about most is that we worked with the Legislative Audit Bureau as they conducted an audit of election administration in 2020. So the legislature directed the Legislative Audit Bureau to conduct an audit in early 2021. We spent the next 6 months and hundreds of staff hours providing information, millions of data points, and answering questions. And when that report was released at the end of 2021, their analysis ultimately concluded that there was no widespread fraud or wrongdoing. It showed that our clerks were doing a fantastic job, that they're well-trained, that they felt supported by the training that was provided. And of course, they also made some suggestions for the agency and to the legislature about changes that they saw to the process. Now, going back to how our agency is structured, the commission is the entity that's charged with then weighing those recommendations and making decisions. And they did just that. So in December, our commission carefully considered and took action on every single one of the recommendations to the agency that were made in the legislative audit report. So you can actually watch that commission meeting, you can read the minutes. We also put together a detailed analysis of every single one of the recommendations as the commission deliberated on those. And so now that the commission has provided that direction, we'll continue to work to implement their direction, and then we'll report back as directed at the end of March about what progress the commission has made on each one of those recommendations. Some of them were really easy or things that we had already been doing and already had implemented. Other things are going to require things like drafting or renewing administrative rules. The commission actually considered 7 different items that involved administrative rules, which they directed us to start bringing back scope statements and other information to them to consider. And so starting as soon as tomorrow at our next commission meeting, we'll be presenting 2 of those scope statements to the commission for their consideration. And so I think from my perspective, we're always looking for ways to make election administration even better. And I really appreciate the efforts that went into making those recommendations. And I appreciate how carefully and deliberately that the commission considered each of those recommendations and has now given us a path forward to make sure that we're implementing those to make our elections even more secure. Finally, I was asked to talk a little bit about confidence in elections. And I think from my perspective, we just have to continue as election officials to be committed to transparency in elections. Again, every single aspect of elections is transparent, but are we providing the information to the public? Are we making sure that they know about those access points to the information they need to understand what is a really complex system? I get to live and breathe elections every day. But for most people, this is not something that they think about except for maybe every 4 years or every 2 years. And so are we providing information to make sure that people can really understand? And I think the second part of that, though, is we can provide the information, but people really have to get engaged with elections, and they have to get engaged with the facts about elections and understand the process. And again, Wisconsin has the most opportunities, probably more than any other state, to get involved in your local elections. You have a local election official in your town. So even if you're in a small town with 100 people, you have a local election official. They're looking for poll workers. There's opportunities there to engage with those processes. So I think we need to do more to show people how elections work, to show people how elections are secured. And I think that people need to make sure that they're engaging with those facts and that they're engaging with elections. And if they have questions, that they're going to an elections expert. You have an elections expert in your community. Your clerk at your county level or at your municipal level is the expert in elections in your communities, and they can show you exactly how it works in your communities. And so I think we need to do more to show people those opportunities, to show people how they can get involved in elections. Anybody can, well, not anybody, but if you're qualified, you can become a poll worker. You can observe the elections. Poll workers have all sorts of responsibilities. You know, some poll workers are registering voters to vote. Some poll workers are checking photo IDs. There's others that are going to be working on processing and canvassing those absentee ballots. You can even watch the ballots as they're counted. So after the polls close, as they're still counting the absentee ballots, that's something that's publicly observable. As those canvasses happen after the election at the municipal and county level, those are publicly observable. And so how can we make sure that people know about those opportunities and really are engaging in hopefully a hands-on way with elections in their community? And so I really see that as sort of our call as we head into the next election cycle in 2022, is how can we continue to build upon that transparency here in our state and make sure that people know about those ways to meaningfully engage with the facts about elections in their community. So I think I'll close it out there, and looking forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Meg. And before Robin starts her questions, I had one from a different member, and it's directed toward you, Ginny. I'm wondering if locally we've had any reports of threats or just bad negative conversations with poll workers, that it might make it more difficult in the future getting poll workers to do the job that we've been talking about this past hour.
I have not had any reports of anything like that. You know, obviously on election day, if someone comes in to register to vote and they don't have the necessary material, you always get some pushback, you know, from voters like that. But I have not heard of any direct threats to any municipal clerks, to any poll workers. You know, when this was going around before the November 2020 election, I actually had a meeting. Our sheriff organized a meeting with all the local police chiefs, and we said, okay, this is what's happening. Here's what we're prepared to do. They knew what I was doing. I knew what they were doing. They knew they were available if anything should happen. So, you know, we were prepared for November when there were threats out there that something may happen. But like I said, to this point, I haven't heard of anybody having direct threats directly, you know, to them or to poll workers or to the municipal clerks.
Thank you. And I think Robin's going to direct the Q&A, and not using the chat function. I'm just going to tell people that, so that we kind of keep kind of an order here. So we'll let Rob get going.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got a question actually for both Megan and for Ginny. Megan, could you expand a little bit on the recommendations that came out from the legislative audit? Maybe just give us a couple of examples. And then question for Ginny, when Megan's done with that, is are there changes that you would like to see that would help make your job easier on election day?
Yeah, so, you know, there were 30 recommendations to us at the state level at the agency, and then there were, I believe, 18 to the legislature itself about changes to the law. And so they ran the gamut from, you know, some that were frankly misunderstandings. We weren't given a chance to review the report before it was released. And so in some instances, it was a misunderstanding about our process. For example, we utilize the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information in our system. And some of that wasn't categorized correctly in the report. And so the commission just simply reaffirmed that we are doing those things and that we'll continue to do those things. In other instances, the commission was asked to start the process to promulgate an administrative rule. And so in 7 instances, they worked to do that. Another example of something that's happening right now is there is a requirement that is part of an administrative rule that we have to specify how we'll contact governing bodies of clerks who have not completed their training requirements. And so the commission directed that we start working on the administrative rule to specify the method that we contact governing bodies, and then to contact those governing bodies using that method. So right now is the closing of a training period for our clerks, And we'll be sending letters to the governing bodies of clerks that don't report enough hours. And so that's one of those things that's happening right now as we speak.
And Ginny, how about you?
So I believe the question was changes to make my life a little easier on election day. And man, if I could have a wish list right now, other than a few law changes, I don't know that there's anything that I would want changed to make my job easier on election day. I think we have processes in place to work with what we have given to us, whether it's statute, whether it's guidelines from WIC, whether it is whatever. And I don't think I have a lot of complaints on election day. I wish I had a helicopter that could get me to all the polling places faster so I can visit all my poll workers on election day, because I really love going out and seeing the poll workers and thanking them for the job they're doing. But other than that, I'm pleased with the processes we have here in La Crosse County and how smoothly our election day works.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is for Meagan. Meagan, there was a question with respect to pending legislation, and I'm wondering if you could just give us an update about is there pending legislation at the legislature with respect to our elections, and if there is, could you tell us if there is a legislation that the Wisconsin Elections Commission would support?
Sure. So, one of the parts about my job being nonpartisan, and, that's required and something I take very seriously, is I do not have an opinion, especially when it comes to legislation. So, when I'm asked by the legislature or when I'm directed by the commission, I'll provide factual information about how something might work, right? So if somebody says, here's our proposal, what would that actually look like on the ground? We'll talk to our clerk partners. We'll offer information about how it would work at the state level, and we'll provide that factual information. From time to time, the commission might decide whether or not they want to support some type of legislation. And so if that happens, they'll consider that as part of one of their commission meetings. And then if they have 4 votes to do so, they may send a letter of support, or they may send me in support to talk to the legislature about their recommendation. But outside of that, I think from my perspective, there aren't good or bad laws. There's just the law. And so we implement the law as it's written. We make sure that we put out information to help our clerk partners as well. But we don't choose the laws. I'll provide factual feedback when I'm directed or asked.
Thank you. I'm wondering if both of you could comment. One of the questions relates to the use of drop boxes. I know that has raised some concerns, and I know especially during the pandemic, it was also a lifesaver for voters who didn't want to have to go inside to be able to submit their ballots, and also were concerned about expeditious mail delivery. And so do either of you see any issues from a security issue relating to the use of drop boxes? Do you think they'll be allowed to continue into the future? And Meagan, why don't you start?
Okay, so there is pending litigation right now around this topic. And so again, if there were changes either issued by the court or the legislature, that's of course what we would utilize. The law does not say anything about drop boxes. That's not a word that's used in the statutes. And so right now, clerks decide within their authority if that's something that's useful for their communities and if they're able to implement it in accordance with the law. And there is some best practices that have been provided by our partners at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security about how to make sure that those drop boxes are secure if you utilize them. And so the commission actually recently asked us to start drafting a administrative rule scope statement. So again, where there's gray area in the law, the administrative rule process is something that the commission can utilize. So they've asked us to start drafting something about if a local jurisdiction utilizes drop boxes, what are those best practices to ensure that they are indeed secure, that they're using a drop box and procedure to make sure that those drop boxes are secure. 1st. So expect to hear more on that, both because, again, it's in litigation and because the commission has asked us to start that rule drafting process for security.
Great, thank you. And Ginny, from the La Crosse County perspective, do you see a continuation of the use of drop boxes for your municipal clerks?
Yeah, I almost see a necessity with drop boxes. You know, Administrator Wolfe mentioned earlier that a lot of these municipal clerks, they're only working 5, 6, 7 hours a day. They only have office hours, you know, a couple days a week for a few hours. There's some municipal clerks here in La Crosse County that don't have set office hours. So, you know, when we're having problems with the mail delivery system, you either have to say, okay, I'm going to drop this in the mail and pray that it's going to get there on time, or I need a way to drop it off at the municipal clerk's office. And if that municipal clerk isn't open when you're able to drop it off, they need a drop box to be able to drop it in. Now, you know, we took this a step up in November. I actually think it was August and November 2020 and so far every election since, where I was providing security seals so the municipal clerks could seal up that drop box. We said, start a log. I want the date you open that drop box, what ballots you took out. We want the seal number you broke. We want the new seal number you put on. You know, for part of the pandemic, the city of La Crosse was closed to the public. How are voters going to be able to drop off their ballots if they didn't have that drop box out front? So I think there's a real need for having these drop boxes. I think there's a way to make them more secure. Obviously, we took that step to do seals, making sure they're attached to buildings so they can't be, you know, easily broken off, stolen, you know, items like that. But I definitely think there's necessity to have these drop boxes. And if we're not using drop boxes, then we need to come up with another method for voters to be able to drop off their absentee ballots when the clerk's not there or when there's not set hours.
Great, thank you. Another question came in with respect to opinions about the impact having outside groups or persons who provide what the question is the financing of election administration at the county level. I'm not 100% sure what they're trying to get at here, but I'm wondering if there's a concern about any kind of impact outside funding has for election security or administration. And Jenny, they talk about it at the county level, so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I can only assume they're probably referring to maybe that Zuckerberg money that went out to some counties that's part of some litigation now. You know, I'm not in favor of outside money being brought into elections. I think that's an unfair way to influence elections. You know, obviously, as I said, we were working on an antiquated coding system for some time. We needed to get it updated, but at the same time, we didn't have that money. And never did I personally think, okay, I'm going to go to some outside group to get this money so we can buy the software we needed. I just don't think that's appropriate. And that is my personal opinion on the situation. I feel if I'm buying software that's going to be for the voters of this county, then that needs to be a budget money done at the county level throughout my government, not from outside groups. And again, that's my personal opinion on it. I don't know if Meagan has anything to add or her own personal opinion to add to it.
Well, I don't, have opinions, but it's something that is a local decision, right? And so, it's something that each jurisdiction is going to have to decide within their authority and in consultation with their corporation council. And that said, the legislature could also decide that they have a law that they'd like to pass about that process as well. But right now, that's another thing where, the law is moot on that as well. We did not, work with any of the private grants. That was not something that the state was involved in or, even really knew about. We did administer a federal grant program. So Congress did provide funding to elections, both from the cybersecurity perspective and from a COVID response perspective in 2020. And so we were able to work with our local election officials to do some really meaningful things. I think that especially when you run elections at the local level, budgets are so incredibly tight in some of these small communities. Some of the ways I've heard it described is, if you're in a small community, your town board isn't getting a call from, the community members about your clerk not having a secure computer to do their work, right? They're probably getting calls about the potholes or other things in their community that they want addressed. And so even when we're talking about $1,000, some communities are going to have a difficult time pulling that together. And so we were able to use those federal funds to ensure that all of our communities have some baseline cybersecurity in place in terms of having secure devices, in terms of being able to attend security training, and also in terms of being able to have IT support. And we were able to use those federal funds to also make sure that as the pandemic hit Wisconsin, especially in those earlier elections in 2020, that we were able to assist with some of those supplies, basic supplies in some of the communities. I think back at that time, and it was impossible to get hand sanitizer, to get masks. And I think about what we even cobbled together to get through some of those early elections. And it was pretty, it was pretty rustic. But I think it was because of those federal grant funds that we're able to even do that. And so, I think it's really important that we have more sustainable federal and state funding to support elections, because again, in these small jurisdictions, they don't have the budgets to accommodate some of these things that we need to keep pace with cybersecurity and other best practices. And so I think we really need to invest in elections, both at the state and the federal level, to ensure that heading into the future, that our local election jurisdictions have what they need, and that's budgeted as part of our state's commitment to secure elections.
Great, thank you. I had another question, and it kind of reflects, Meagan, what you were talking about in terms of in Wisconsin, how unique we are, that the elections are really run at the local level. And the question is, what does it take to be a poll worker, and how does one go about asking to be a poll worker? And so maybe Ginny, if you could respond to that for La Crosse County. If I was moved by this presentation and thought, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead, which by the way I am a poll worker, but I'm gonna go ahead and want to sign up for a poll worker, what would I have to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's just something that's as simple as calling your municipal clerk. They're the chief election official at the municipal level. They're the ones that set up their polling places. They schedule the poll workers. So you need to call your municipal clerk. You need to say, hey, I'm interested in being a poll worker. Obviously, I have several poll worker trainings that will happen before the February primary, before the April election. We have lots of new poll workers that need training. That poll worker is going to make sure you get the training you need, and then they're going to schedule you on election day to come in and work. First couple elections, they'll probably partner you up with a more experienced poll worker so you get the hang of things, and then they go from there. So it's as simple as calling your municipal clerk, just saying, hey, I'm interested in being a poll worker. And if it's not something on election day, go, hey, I'm interested in helping out with the elections. Is there some other way I can get involved? But yeah, I think it always starts at your municipal clerk level.
Thank you. I have one more question, and this is for Meagan, I think. Jenny, I think if you want to have any comments, you can also add it. But one of the things, Meagan, that you said during your presentation is that in the entire state of Wisconsin, that every ballot cast has a paper trail, a paper ballot that's kept. Is that not the case in other states? Do some states just simply have electronic? Is that maybe where there's some confusion or misunderstandings? Because I think people in Wisconsin know that they have that paper, and I'm wondering if you could comment on how other states do that.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number, because I know most states have headed in that direction. But yes, that is the case, that in some states that's not a requirement of their state law. And so in some places they may have a direct recording voting equipment where they make the selection on the screen, and there is not a paper trail necessarily. And so that has been the case in Wisconsin law. Since we've had electronic voting equipment, is there's always been that paper trail, and that paper trail is, again, that's always going to be the official artifacts we go back to, right? So if there were ever a question about the election, if there were some kind of problem identified as part of the post-election audits, that paper trail is what's going to be utilized as the official artifact, the official vote cast as part of that election. So I think that most states have all moved in that direction as well, but that has always been the case here in the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. I have another question here, and it has to do with if election officials are supposed to be nonpartisan, does that mean that you shouldn't be voting? And I guess it kind of gets to that differentiation between what's the difference between nonpartisanship and and how does that relate to your ability to cast a ballot for who you want to be governed by?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, how that's defined is actually defined in law. So it's not a standard that we make up or a standard that we set. It's defined as part of law. And so the law defines it as drawing the line in terms of political contribution. I, personally hold myself to a higher bar. And I think that any sort of engagement with political activity is not something that I'm interested in doing. I think it's really important to be the factual, nonpartisan expert about elections. But the law makes the distinction in terms of political contributions.
And I would note that there are officers in the League of Women Voters who are also held by that same position of not being able to contribute and not actively endorsing candidates and things like that, because again, the League is also nonpartisan, meaning it doesn't necessarily mean we don't get involved in political issues. It just means that we don't support political parties or specific candidates. So it's I think we can understand where that comes from. So.
Well, one more thing that's part of that too is that you can't hold a partisan office. So somebody in my position can't have previously held a partisan office. So that's the other piece of the requirement.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I don't have any, well, let me just check. I think one might have come in here. Okay, so another question we have is that can you differentiate on national news stations, there's a term that's used with respect to election judge. Is there such a position in Wisconsin, and is that comparable to what the WEC is, or a canvas board? Can you help us with that terminology?
Yeah, great question. Election administration is so different from state to state. So the terminologies, the procedures that are used are all established by state law. And so a lot of times it is really confusing for people, especially if they have moved from a different state, to sort of understand, what are we talking about? And so I think from what I understand, an election judge would sort of be equivalent to a poll worker in other places. But you're right, there's a lot of different different roles in election administration, both here and in other states. So during a recount, you're going to have the board of recounters that are adjudicating some of those decisions. When the ballots are being counted and double checked at the canvass process, you have that board of canvassers. The commission, I wouldn't describe them as election judges per se, but they do have a role in when complaints are brought to them. So if somebody alleges a sworn complaint that alleges a violation of election law, the commission does decide those, and then the decision of the commission can be appealed to a circuit court. So there are a lot of different roles in sort of adjudicating some of those decisions that have to happen in elections, but our statute doesn't have an election judge as a term that's used, but I think that's an equivalent to a poll worker in other states.
Meagan, this is Ellen speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt, Robin.
Good.
Just building off your last response and the obligation of the commission to enforce election law. Part of the after effect of the last election, the presidential election, was the nursing home issue. Because of the pandemic, special deputies didn't go into nursing homes and collect ballots. And I seem to remember, if he was a sheriff in Racine County, I'm not sure, standing up and saying, boy, that's somebody's fault because people got these poor nursing home folks to sign the ballots wrong, blah, 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 blah. Is that obviously is something for criminal prosecution if they believe it should be criminally prosecuted. But would that be also something that the Election Commission would look at for enforcement if they had received a sworn complaint, not just the news broadcast?
Yeah, if there was a sworn complaint where either, so there's two different kinds of complaints that come before the commission. One's what we call Wisconsin State Statute Section 505 complaint. Those are allegations of election fraud, election, misconduct, and those happen during closed session, where the commission might consider something like a referral to a district attorney. And so in the example you just described, that's probably what would happen there is somebody would file sworn information, ask the commission to take a look at it, but the commission isn't a law enforcement entity. So ultimately they would refer that to a district attorney for them to take over the investigation. Then there's what we call a 506 complaint, and that's some type of sworn complaint against an election official. So for example, if somebody thought that a poll worker or a clerk or somebody at the Elections Commission had not acted appropriately for their office, that's also something that could be filed before the commission. And then the commission is ultimately going to take a look at that and they're going to issue a decision. But then that is the first step in bringing an election-related offense before the circuit court. And so if somebody didn't agree with the election commission's decision, they could then bring that decision and appeal it before the circuit court.
Thank you, Megan. So given the time and given the breadth of information that both of you provided, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to Mary Nugent now, who is our program committee chair and is the one who gets all the credit for bringing you both here, which we're incredibly grateful for having you. And Mary, why don't you go ahead and take it over?
Thank you, Robin. I want to give a personal thank you to the speakers for sharing the information and expertise and insight into the health of our election management. Understanding the strengths and vulnerabilities of our elections is so critical for us to have. We applaud our local and state election officials on their amazing work, and also applaud the many poll workers who take great pride in the field. So again, thank you very much. Thanks again to our audience for participating in this program. I want to invite you to join us for both the fireside chat with Mayor Mitch Reynolds on January 18th and our next lunch and learn on Tuesday, February 8th, where we will discuss the importance of the roles and responsibilities of their challenges and rewards. Local school board president is Mary Jo Rosmanowski from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. This concludes our January program. Stay more, and stay well.